right? Walking across the street and having a
Yeah.
conversation. So we looked deeper into what alcohol is actually doing to these neurons without, ablating them. And what we found was something that we didn't expect. It was sort of outside our wheelhouse, so to speak. We looked at the inputs to these neurons to see if the activity that drive or inhibit these interneurons is affected by chronic alcohol exposure. And so these neurons, interneurons, are activated by the cortex, and we found that that connection is unaffected. But what was affected was inhibition onto these interneurons. And inhibition onto these interneurons comes from two other parts of the brain, one within the basal ganglia and one within the thalamus, the globus pallidus and the thalamic reticular nucleus, respectively. And we found that these GABA inputs were essentially lost. They were just like dissociated from these interneurons, which had a dramatic disruption of inhibitory control over these interneurons. So, and that was mediated by this complex effect of alcohol on the things that surround these interneurons in particular. And so these like matrix of proteins that sort of solidify the inputs onto these neurons, and those were sort of dissolved after alcohol exposure, which led to this dissociation of these GABA inputs onto these interneurons. So really, it's a circuit problem onto these interneurons where they're losing inhibitory control. So that's what we're looking into next. We have to fix that part or tackle this, loss of matrix proteins around these neurons that help to keep those GABA inputs intact.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess in a sense, what this sort of implies is that one way to think about alcoholism or alcohol use disorder, the compulsive consumption of alcohol, is that you might naturally think, okay, why can't these people learn or unlearn to do this? But in a sense, it's almost like, well, maybe the circuit is sort of over learning to do certain behaviors. The alcohol is, in other words, like you said, it's almost like a learning agent, and a certain type of circuit that's involved in inflexible behavior and sort of locking you into doing something over and over again. It's been overtrained, actually, and you actually kind of want to run that back in reverse ultimately. It's not that necessarily learning has been disrupted, like you've been unable to learn something. It's that you've overlearned one thing, and now it's just kind of really cemented into the circuitry
and into your life.
Yeah,
as a result.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about psychedelics because you've done work that is interesting as well. And so to connect this back to some of the things we were talking about earlier, we talked about the colostrum and the idea that the brain has these different states that it goes into that are functionally distinct. You have the default mode network, you have other networks and other patterns of activity in the brain. You have different sleep and waking states, and the brain is constantly sort of flipping and flopping between these according to what the demands on the animal are, the types of tasks that need to be formed, how you need to behave, and so forth. And we mentioned the default mode network, and that's one that comes up a lot when we talk about things like psychedelics. So let's step back to that for a second. The default mode network, just describe for people one more time what that is and how people think about it. And what is the connection there with psychedelics? What have the observations been that have sort of linked those two things together so far in the literature?
Yeah, so default mode network very simply is a brain state, or it's a network of cortical regions that activate when you're not performing a task that requires you to interact with the external sensory world. So we can see this activated when you're simply sitting or laying down in a scanner, staring at a plus sign, just thinking about what you're going to have for dinner or what happened to you earlier that day. Default mode network will turn on.